This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by Allison Cook, Tim, and Super Inframan. Thank you so very much. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And I'm joined here by Wren.
Hey, everyone.
And Sean McCleaver.
Hi.
And as I said, Sean, it sounds like you write horror stories or something, but that's your real name.
That's it.
That's great. So what you did write is something very interesting. And the name of this is Ancient Magic and Modern Ghost Hunting, the Key to Spirit Manifestations. And you had sent me this a while ago, and I was trying to proofread it for you, and my life just kept getting too busy for me to actually get all the way through. But now you've published it, and I've read the whole thing, and it's really a very interesting take on what might help bring out more manifestations during ghost hunting using essentially ritual magic ideas.
That's correct. Yep.
And what made you think of this?
Because I'm an amateur practicing magician, and I've also had a lot of paranormal encounters. When I was younger, I had a very, very traumatic haunting in the basement that I was living in when I was a teenager. And that was a full-on demon. And that was so traumatic that I wanted to search for a way of preventing that sort of helplessness. Again, I wanted some sort of self-defense. And years went by, and I didn't find too much. And I finally stumbled upon ceremonial magic, and it seemed that this group of people, they had it down to a science. And I said, let me take a look at this. And I noticed patterns between what the magicians did and what Taoist priests would do, and even Catholic priests would do. And I realized that, because this is a true phenomenon, there are rules, there are principles that exist across all spirit manifestations.
Let's deal with demons first, since you threw that out there. We all know everything is demons. That's pretty much the explanation for everything. But you have a whole section of this talking about the word demon and what that means, and comparing it to ghosts in contrast. So do you want to get a little into the history of the word demon and where that comes from?
Sure. So it stems from the Greek word daimon, or daemon, which did not have negative connotations when it was in use. That came later after Christians and even Muslims took over these terms to mean something evil. But the original term daemon referred to a spirit, basically a spirit in general. And within daemon, there would be thousands and hundreds of other classifications, like nymphs and satyrs. You could probably lump in like leprechauns. These are all considered daemons. And instead of having to translate all of these from ancient Greek texts, the Christian monks just said, they're evil, they're all demons, they'll put them in under one word. It's politically advantageous to do that, but it's also a whole lot easier, and writing takes time, and parchment is expensive, so, it's better to do it that way. But yeah, it originally was not a sort of moral judgment at all, and that came later.
Okay. But you're using that term demon, and how do you define that in what happened to you?
It's just a word of convenience. I say demon, daemon. I use them kind of interchangeably depending on who I'm talking to. But in this particular case, the daemon that was in my basement was not very nice at all. It was pretty vicious, and I would just use demon because it has that negative connotation. So in this particular context, it makes sense.
Okay. All right. Did you want to add anything, Ren?
Yeah, I was curious about this because I was reading that section, and I'm curious. What are your thoughts then on, like, let's say the goetic spirits or the spirits from the Grimoire Verum? Like, do you consider them the same thing as the entity you encountered as a kid, or something different?
No, there's something much, much more powerful. The spirits of the Goetia, a lot of them are actually pagan gods that have, for some reason, decided to no longer serve humanity, and so we are given this magic, this procedure to essentially force them to serve humanity. And but they command, hundreds of thousands of legions underneath them, and they have a certain degree of rationality and critical thinking and power. So that's a lot different from what was in my room, which is probably a very, very low version of that, a very, very low daemon, which probably wasn't very powerful at all. To me, it was powerful, but in comparison to the demons of the Goetia, absolutely not.
Yes, I've always found that distinction interesting because the way I conceptualize it, the spirits of the Goetia or the Verum or any number of other grimoires are in essence of being not that different from, say, like the angelic hierarchy. They simply got put on one side of the line when the Yahwist cult kind of took over the Hebrew religion after the Babylonian captivity, right? So a lot of the former gods like Baal, Ashtaroth, like El and others were sort of placed into this category of demons because they were the patron gods of other tribes or rival cultures. While the angels, I think, were in a similar boat. A lot of the angels were also sort of, minor deities or demigods or whatever that were worshipped by one another tribe. And maybe those tribes were more aligned with the Yahwist cult. And so they said, okay, well, you can keep your gods, but they're not gods anymore. They're angels and they're under our God. And I feel like that divide happened and everything kind of got put on into like this good evil binary, but that the actual reality of it when you actually conjure and work with these spirits is like they're not all that different from each other.
I guess it really depends on your one-to-one interaction with them specifically. And, at least with the goetic spirits, they're not going to do anything for you if you simply give them offerings on a regular basis. It's not going to happen. They don't want to be bound. They don't want to serve humanity. And that's why we need a circle. We need God names. We need legal bindings on them because they're recalcitrant. And that can be contrasted with like the personality of, let's say, angels who can be petitioned and who seem to respond a whole lot better. And they don't require, threats,
Yeah. I noticed you mentioned the drawing spirits into crystals, and that's like the main practice that I do. So, like, I use the Trithemian method. So
that's a powerful method.
Yeah, I love it. It's simple, and I've had great experiences with it. And it's I've been encouraging people to I think it's gotten a lot more popular over the last 2 or 3 years because of people like Rufus Opus and Sam Block and others. So it's nice to see a resurgence in it, but I've encouraged a lot of people who are just getting into spirit conjurations, like, hey, check this out because it's a little less spooky and a little less dangerous than dealing with like the Goetia, right? It's a little bit safer.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I guess another alternative for doing angel work would be like Thomas Rudd's manuscripts and materials. And that was actually the manuscripts that I used when I first started doing this. And the advantage of those manuscripts is the simplicity. However, it gets complicated because Rudd's evocation scripts go on for like 4 or 5 pages, single space, and it drives crazy. You know what I mean? So it takes you like 15 minutes to go through it, 20 minutes to go through it. And as you know, doing evocations like that to get the spirit into the room, it could take hours at times. It's not easy.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's not. Yeah. I feel like the actual process of going through those lengthy invocations is a bit like getting into a trance state, right? Like the repetition, repeating it over and over again. It's a bit like, I mean, you mentioned like Taoist magic. It reminds me like of mantras in esoteric Buddhism, right? Like you kind of repeat this invocation over and over again, and it starts to sort of change your surroundings and change your mental state until, you can perceive the spirit.
Yeah, every time I've done it, I can't say that I've experienced a trance state because I've always had to be hyper aware of what was going on around me. So like there was a point where I was actually trying to evoke a particular angel. This is when I had no idea what I was doing. I had my tablet with the PDF on it, and I just started reading, literally in the woods. And surprisingly, after 2.5 hours, I did get a response, and I got what sounded like grunting coming out of the circle, and I had the experience of hearing a scream from somebody. It sounded like out in the distance, but at this time, it was raining. It was dark. Nobody was in the woods where I was. And if you were to read Frater Ashton Chassan's book, Gateways Through Stone and Circle, in the back of it, he talks about his experience with that same angel, and his wife actually heard someone scream as well. So, so that seems to be a signal when that spirit is acknowledging you. So that's interesting.
Yeah, you'll never get over that first time you actually hear something speak when you're conjuring it, because you kind of expect. Yeah, you like kind of expect it to just like be sort of in your head, but not really, like very subtle. But then it actually sounds like someone's standing in the room with you talking to you, and you can't see them. It's so weird.
Yeah, it's different. It's different because the voice doesn't echo. It's there, but it doesn't echo. It's very strange.
Well, let's go to, why don't we talk about your experience that got you into thinking this way? Why don't we start there, and then we'll go into some of the methodology you suggest in the book.
Okay, so that was the basement experience that really got me onto this track. This spirit was in the house when I first moved in there in the basement. I'm not sure how it kind of got there. Later on, I found out that my next door neighbor was a practicing witch. So I imagine there was some sort of like seepage or something going through the walls because she was my neighbor, and we were in a condo, so we were only separated by a few inches of wall. But in the middle of the night, I'd hear like a person walk up to me and whisper in my ear. That would freak me out. I had the feeling of terror always in that room. Felt like I was being watched. In the middle of the night, I'd wake up and I'd actually be scared to look around the room because I was afraid of what I might see. It just felt like something was there in the air, ready to pounce, and I couldn't protect myself from it whatsoever. And it was changing my mood. I couldn't sleep. I was getting aggravated very easily. My relationship with my family was under strain because we were all fighting. And, I would be down in the basement and I would hear banging upstairs. At one point, it sounded like someone took a pot and threw it at a wall of glass mirrors, which we had. So I ran upstairs. Nothing is out of place whatsoever. Everything's perfectly fine. So these experiences really freaked me out. And my girlfriend at the time started studying Wicca. So she goes, she's seeing this happen. So she says, let's smudge the room. I said, absolutely. Do whatever you want to do. Whatever you want to do, I'm completely on board. I just want this to stop. So she smudges the room very thoroughly. She creates some sort of energy barrier around the room, right? So on the right side of the bed, she says that there's this very small opening that I need to crawl through, and I can't hit the rest of the energy field, otherwise it's going to shatter. And now it seems kind of funny. At the time, it was not funny. I took that very seriously. So I was in and out of that opening as accurately as I could. And of course, none of this actually worked. One night, the spirit actually walked onto my bed, started breathing into my ear, jumped off the bed, and ran to the back of the room. And because it was a concrete floor, I could actually audibly hear it disappear in mid-footstep as it was running toward the back of the room. So I got up, I slapped the lights on. My dog at the time was sniffing all over the room, and she couldn't find anything. So she was confused. I was confused. My girlfriend was there, so she witnessed it. So this was not like in my head, and this was not a individual thing. Everyone in my house was experiencing things. And after I moved out, I really couldn't sleep right. So that's when I began the search, because I figured, down the road, if I have kids and they start experiencing this phenomenon, what am I going to do? I'm going to be helpless. I don't want to be put in a situation.
Right. I've had one of the things you describe is hearing like fabric moving, like someone's walking near you.
Yes. And it sounds like. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say I've had that, and I don't think I've ever heard anyone else describe that, because it's a very distinct sound. It's fabric moving on fabric.
Yeah, it's almost like someone's like wearing a robe and they're walking around the room. It's very subtle.
But if the room's quiet, it's also very noticeable.
Yeah. So what I do is I go to bed with my earbuds in. Yeah, every night.
It just doesn't faze me. It's just every once in a while that'll happen, and usually it's accompanied by other minor little things, and at this point I just ignore them. Usually because I just want to go to sleep. But I mean, it's some of that stuff is familiar. I just didn't have I've never had the huge negativity that you got out of it. And I don't know if that's just because it didn't freak me out or what.
I don't know. Looking back on it and having read some stuff on shamanism, I kind of view it as almost like a shamanic ordeal, sort of like an initiation, that people go through. And it seems like a lot of magicians have this. A lot of energy healers have this. They go through a really tough time with the spiritual world, and it's traumatizing, but then they heal from it, and they go back even stronger, and they're able to help other people. I've seen that pattern time and time again. Yeah,
that's true. There was something else that you had written about in those experiences. I'm trying to remember what it was. I don't remember. You have it very concisely written in the book, though.
Was it about the bed sheets?
Maybe. Or the dog. They were saying with the dog.
Yeah, so at the time that the spirit was walking onto my bed, the dog was on the floor, and she had this very, very low growl, but it was a very, drawn out growl. So she wasn't barking, and she sounded almost scared. And that's the first time she ever did that. If something was really offensive to her, she would just go after it, and she definitely didn't go anywhere near this. So that kind of told me that this is not something that probably has our best interest at heart if my dog is afraid of it,
Right. And it actually pushed down on your bed considerably, you said.
Yeah. At first I thought, is this like a really fat raccoon that somehow got into the basement? What is this? Because the springs in my mattress were snapping, and my body was tilting toward the area that it was pushing down on the bed, almost like it was standing up on the bed. And I thought, this is absolutely crazy. And I couldn't move. I was completely paralyzed. And it only decided to leap off the bed when I regained control of one of my legs, because I was going to start just kicking at it because my back was turned toward it. I was going to start kicking at it to see what would happen. And before I was able to do that, it jumped off the bed and ran away, almost like it anticipated that I had regained control of my leg. Now, it's weird that it would have predicted that, and it's also weird that an immaterial spirit would be afraid of my leg. So
right.
it's odd.
Were you asleep when this stuff started, or were you fully awake still when these encounters occurred?
I was actually sleeping. What woke me up was my girlfriend. I had my arm around her. Her nails started digging into my arm because she heard a little boy crying toward the back of our room. I didn't hear that. I just felt her claws digging into me, and I woke up pretty rapidly, as you can imagine, thinking, "What's going on here?"
Right.
And then I felt the spirit walk onto the bed, and then I started gripping her because I thought, "Oh my God," you know. So yeah, she heard it first. But I also want to mention that this didn't happen at 2:00 in the morning. This happened at like 7:00 in the morning, with the sun up, and I think the only thing else that'd be relevant was the fact that I had my windows in the basement blocked. I had a few pillows up there, so it was completely dark in the room.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay. So you start this book basically by kind of defining what a ghost is, or at least how you're going to use it.
yeah, I kind of define it as a person's post life existence capable of experience, sensation, because they seem to not pop up everywhere all the time. They sort of pop up and they go somewhere else when they vanish. So to me, it seems like the environment is playing a pretty heavy role in terms of when they can manifest, when they can show up. So I tried to define the ghost in terms of its manifestations in the organic environment, meaning on our body, on our nervous system, on our psychology. So on our body, they can appear as bruises. They could cut us, they can scratch us. They can also create hallucinations. So that's a cognitive ability that they have. People can walk into a room. Like I've heard this story. Someone walked into a room and they saw a dead body on the floor full of blood. They freaked out. They called the police. The police came. There was nothing on the floor at all. So those
Right.
type of hallucinations happen all the time. And that hallucination is quite different from a spirit actually appearing in the environment, knocking over some dishes, and then leaving again. One has verified interaction with the environment, and one may just be an illusion. And for anyone who's ever done ritual magic and has a spirit outside the circle, they know that the entire time that spirit is there, it's casting illusions on you. So as it's there talking to you, you're also having these internal visions as well. And that's not something that's talked about very often, but it's true. So spirits definitely have that ability as well. But overall, I tried to pin down exactly how I use the word. That way, I can't hide behind ambiguity, and that everyone's on the same page.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you do the same thing with magic. So how do you want to define that?
Magic, the word magic is difficult because it has different styles depending on the culture and the times. Typically, I tend to define Grimoire Magic, which is a method of calling a spirit into an environment, binding them to do a particular job, dismissing them, having them do that thing, and then having the magician reap the rewards. That's really what I mean by magic. It's a very rigid process with not a lot of flexibility, and it's very difficult to do. It includes 3, 6, or 9 days of fasting, water fasting. Perhaps if you're eating, you're probably eating only a few ounces of bread after the sun goes down. You have to consecrate all your equipment, including your white robes that have to be made out of cotton or linen. There is a ritual blade that gets consecrated. That's either a knife or a dagger or a sword. And you have your circle that has the names of God in it, the names of angels. That has to be created and consecrated. On top of that, you also have the location. So it's a very, very intricate process, and I do my best to outline it.
Okay. All right. Anything you want to say, Wes? Wes, Wren.
What?
I don't know where Wes came from.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I echo all of what you're saying. I think the mention of location is really interesting. because if you read any like Daniel Ogden's book of Greek and Roman necromancy, or even Agrippa in the fourth book of occult philosophy, they say very particularly that location is extremely important when it comes to conjuring. I mean, it's important when it comes to conjuring spirits in general, right? Like you want a place that's away from populated areas, where you can be alone, where there's not much traffic. You know, you can kind of be alone with the spirits. But especially in necromancy, if you're wanting to call human shades, it needs to be in a place, most particularly, I think they say either by water, so like by rivers, by the ocean, inside of caves, which is where the traditional necromantians were built, or places where there has been blood. Like, and that's something I was going to ask you about later, was because you did bring up blood at one point, and I wanted to talk to you about that. But like, so, you know, either, I guess, bodies or blood. So like graveyards, as silly as it is, graveyards are perfectly good places to do necromancy because human dead are buried there. But also battlefields, or places where violent things have happened. Because one thing Agrippa mentions is that the human dead aren't necessarily super willing or able to come at your beck and call, right? Especially if they are someone who, you know, died happily and naturally, right? They may not come when you call them. That it's much more effective to conjure shades of human dead that are who either died violently or left with unfinished business. And that's like a cliche thing that you see in, you know, media and stuff, but it does hold true. I mean, people were writing about this thousands of years ago, that's like an important aspect of it.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Let's see. I don't know where to begin there.
well, let's talk about location. So I'm interested in hearing like your thoughts on like, where do you like to do necromancy, or like where do you think it's useful to, like, let's say you wanted to conjure, you know, your dead uncle who was murdered in murdered in some poker game or something. You know, you want to call it to see where he buried all of his gold coins. Like, where would you conjure him?
Well, so I'm very much a practicing magician, and I emphasize practicing because I'm not very good at it. And and I would probably take the lazy approach, and I would try to find a place that I knew was already haunted, that had a spirit already there, that I knew was bound to that location and was already active. So I know my only challenge is activating the spirit. And I would just bring, a circle, my robes, and fast for a few days and give it some orders and see if that was effective. But in terms of location, the ideal location would, number one, be absolutely by water. That goes without saying. Mm-hmm. And most of the really severe haunting cases in the world, they always seem to be by water. And I'm not exactly sure why that is, but I want it to be by water. I want it to be secluded, so I don't need it to be by a heavy and noisy city. I don't need it to be around a lot of bad smells or pollutants or smog. A very pure place. And ideally, the place would have an overabundance of negative ions. That was the big discovery of the book, figuring out that negative ions play a very key role in everything in ceremonial magic, and also a great role in haunting cases as well. And water, especially churning water, like the ocean waves crashing on the beach or a waterfall, that produces an overabundance of negative ions. And it seems that negative ions allow spirits to manifest a lot easier.
I thought that was really interesting when you mentioned that. Yeah, I was going to see if you could elaborate on that. Like, where did you find that out, or how did you find that out?
Also explain to people what negative ions are.
Oh, yeah.
So negative ions are air molecules that have gained or lost an electron. So when they gain an electron, they're negative. When they lose it, they're positive. So positive ions create a lot of tension in the air. They cling to pollutants and dust and dirt. And they basically build a charge in the air. You feel them really strongly right before a thunderstorm, for example, and during a thunderstorm. But after the thunderstorm, all the charge in the air has been dissipated and discharged. So now negative ions are all around. So there's that feeling of lightness. There's a feeling of freshness in the air. And that is the stuff we're looking for when it comes to spirit locations, areas that have an abundance of that. Those areas are, again, by water or deep within caves, dark, wet caves in the middle of the woods, secluded, even on top of mountain ranges where a lot of air is blowing because of the minerals from the earth. Those are releasing negative ions. Those places are ideal.
Okay. And yeah, to Wren's point, how did you figure this out?
I'm not sure. I think it was kind of by accident, to be honest with you. I think I read somewhere in passing that spirit activity increases after thunderstorms. And I thought, why would that be? Yeah, I thought, why would that be? So I looked into it and I saw that negative ions played a big part after thunderstorms. So then I looked at ceremonial magic, and it turns out that ceremonial magic is littered with the concept of negative ions. So like cotton and linen that we use for robes, that has an abundance of negative ions. The locations we choose are the same ones I just described. Negative ions are present there as well. Even when it comes to the crystal ball that is used to witness the reflection of the spirit, in magic we would flank that crystal ball with 2 candles made of pure beeswax. Now, a lot of magicians cheat, but you can't cheat on this one. It has to be pure beeswax, because when you light the candle, the heat from the fire is mixing with the pure beeswax, and that's what's creating the negative ion effect. You don't get that unless it's pure beeswax. So you have these 2 candles flanking, giving off these negative ions, and it's creating a Vesica Pisces shape of concentration right where the crystal ball is. So it seems, and that's the area where we need the spirit to appear. So again, it seems like it's very prominent in magic as well.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I've never really, I normally don't get that materialist with my magic, but that definitely scratches a certain itch I've gotten, in trying to explain how some of this stuff works on a physical level. So I'm really going to experiment with that. I think that's super cool, because there should be ways to measure, measure this in the environment. Do you think too that maybe why things like EMF meters and things can be used in ghost hunting? Is it related to the same process?
So electromagnetic fields actually create positive ions. So a lot of people have speculated that bringing a lot of equipment to a location can actually hinder the process, and I think they're right.
Okay.
Well, I always found it interesting when I have Steve Mira on, and he was talking about the Seattle Demon House or whatever it's called there. And one of the EVPs they got very, very clearly when they turned on the infrared camera was a voice saying, "Oh, we don't like that."
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, almost like the infrared light hurt them, or the cameras hurt them somehow.
But particularly the infrared.
Yeah.
Now that's interesting. Now, if I remember right, Sasquatch also responds to infrared in a very agitated way too. Have you guys heard that too?
No.
Yeah, I heard that. Where did I hear that from? I heard that somewhere. But one of the methods I heard that's to deter Sasquatch is to keep little lights on around the house, like Christmas lights, or even using infrared lights like you would have, I guess, on a trail cam or something, that apparently they just stay away from it. And I'm not sure why that is, but I'll just throw it out there for what it's worth.
Interesting. Well, I mean, they could also be a different type of spirit too, so.
Yeah.
There was something else I was just gonna. What do you, and you can both kind of deal with this one, but do you think that the things that are present, like when we look at magical texts and stuff, do you think these are describing literal things, or things that we've just put faces on, or symbolic things, or what?
Both.
Okay.
Hmm. Yeah, because they're absolutely literal to a certain degree, and that's the big shift. One of the patterns in the paranormal, and I know George Hansen has brought this up, is the idea of marginality, that things get marginalized, especially in the paranormal, so that people don't witness it, they don't see it, or they don't hear about it. And if they do, it's often discredited or there's some hoaxing attached to it, so people don't take it seriously. Magic is absolutely like that, because you have grimoires like the Goetia at Barnes and Noble sitting on the shelf and no one believes it.
Yeah, true. But I guess I mean, like, okay, if you say this is the god of whatever, is it really, or is that just the face it's taking?
Um, so I believe that the spirits definitely take different shape depending on which culture is witnessing it. I don't believe that there's a large psychological effect to this. I just think it's a matter of how powerful is the particular spirit. Is it actually a god? Is it something lower than a god? But I definitely believe that there are beings that are behind the idea. So I guess, so in that sense, yeah, I guess it is literal in my view.
Okay. Because I think there could definitely be something behind it. I feel like we just put our names on them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Absolutely. There's definitely something behind it, but we will ascribe different labels and categories for it.
What do you think, Wren?
I waffle on this. I mean, I sort of think about it in both ways. Like, if you conjure a god and the god shows up, or you conjure a demon and the demon shows up, in the moment, it doesn't really matter if it's, at the core of it, if it's really what it says it is, or if it's really, it really is truly a god or whatever, because the experience of it is going to be as such. Now, I do think that certain phenomena manifest in a way that they use sort of like archetypal images to communicate with us. And that's because I do think that whatever spirits are, they do exist. They exist somewhere that is alien to us, to the extent that in order to communicate with us effectively and coherently, they must utilize images that are born from our subconscious. The problem when you start thinking this way, though, is that, and I was just talking to somebody about this the other day, you get into a bit of a bootstrap paradox, right? Because it's like, well, where did those images in our subconscious come from? Right?
Yeah,
so
right.
If they're basing their forms on images from our subconscious that were based on our experiences with them in the past, then what came first? It's like you can't answer that. It becomes a literal bootstrap paradox, which, maybe says a lot about the nature of the occult and these things. I've said time and time again that I think that a large mechanism in the occult is time-based, retrocausality and retrocausal effects. I've even had like a preliminary, and this is more referring to practical enchantment and spirit conjuration, but that it possibly is the manipulation of bootstrap paradoxes and retrocausality in order to create effects.
Okay. All right.
Mechanism of that, I have no idea.
Right, obviously.
I mean, Eric Wargo, wrote a whole book about this that a lot of people have read and liked.
Yeah, it's a very good book. So you talk about some of John Dee's writing and how it compares to an old poem called Thunder Perfect Mind.
Yeah, so this was pretty cool. So Thunder Perfect Mind was written in the early, I don't know what it was, 4th or 3rd century, something like this. And it's actually a Gnostic poem where Gnostic scholars think that the spirit named Barbello is speaking through these Gnostic devotees. And it's a very strange poem. And in it, there's a lot of juxtapositions. And I think I would just refer people just to read it because I don't think I can explain this very well. But John Dee was a 15th century magician who worked with Edward Kelly, and they were channeling a lot of these spirits and angels. And one of these spirits gave them this narrative. It wasn't exactly a poem, but it was poem-esque. And it was very similar to Thunder Perfect Mind in such a way that if you saw them side by side, you would swear that it was the same author of both. The issue is Thunder Perfect Mind wasn't even discovered until the 1940s when they discovered the Nag Hammadi library. So John Dee could not have copied it at all. So we know that's authentic. I would go as far as saying, I think I know what spirit it is. And it's actually a spirit in the Goetia. And that's a spirit that talks that way when you call her in. So I think I've identified the exact spirit for that one.
So you think in this case they were both talking to literally the same spirit? That's
correct.
Okay. What did you say, Wren?
Don't mind me asking. I was just going to ask which spirit you think it is.
Astaroth.
Yeah, I would have to agree there.
And for my evidence for that, I would refer you to John R. King's blog. He made a blog post about he's a magician. He created a blog post in which he spoke to Astaroth. When she came into the room, he recorded what she said, and she was saying the same exact thing. She was using the same sort of juxtapositions. So I would not be surprised at all if that was the exact spirit responsible for both poems.
Yeah, and the daughter of fortitude, is often referred to as Babylon.
Yeah.
Babylon's relationship with Astaroth is very close. I'll just put it that way. They're not the same, but that also I can't really go into that too much. It doesn't really mean the same thing that they're not the same as you probably think. But having my own personal experiences with Astaroth, I have to agree with you on this.
Cool.
All right.
Which, by the way, you brought up John King. If people haven't read Imperial Arts, that is a wonderful book. It's I have no idea if John King is telling the truth, and I'm not calling John King a liar, but I am saying that it's a very entertaining read, regardless of whether or not it's like a factual account of what happened, because they are some very, very dramatic evocations, and I can't say I've had that same level of clarity. But it's an extremely fun read either way.
Okay. All right. You talk a lot about liminality, and why do you think liminality is a factor in any of this stuff?
Yeah. So
easy question.
So I'm not really sure. I think it has something to do with the fact that I think reality is a sort of fractal pattern. It's one pattern. It's one pattern that is emerging from different scopes and different levels. For example, the level of our cells in our body. If anyone has studied the cell in depth, they know that the life of a cell is like a galaxy. It is so complex. And yet we have this level that we're speaking at now, and it's equally complex. Then we have these spiritual realms that are probably ineffably complex. And it seems like this fractal pattern is going up and down. And I think that's what the Hermetic phrase, as above, so below, as within, so without, means, is that the world is fractaled. I think in order to connect these patterns, you need that liminal space that blends into the next. I think this is a bit of a cop-out, frankly, because I don't really know how to answer the question. I don't really know. I'll put it that way. I don't really know.
Okay. But you want to explain? Go ahead.
I was going to say, liminality, I think, is something that magicians are familiar with. We constantly exist in this world that's a little bit between science and a little bit between mysticism. Right? People utilize trance states, liminal states are important. Even locations in which these rituals are done are usually liminal places. They're places where movement happens and change occurs, right? underground, which is, halfway between the underworld and the upper world, or they're on, over bodies of water, bridges. I think the manipulation of liminal states and liminal places is like a really key factor in doing effective magic.
And again, the question becomes why? Like, what does it do to us that makes that a thing? Like, is it because we're stepping outside of the norm?
I kind of feel like it's meeting the spirits halfway, right? Like that is one thing I wanted to bring up too, like the idea of incubation versus evocation. I think when you are participating in liminality, you're stepping one foot into their world, right? And it's a little easier for them to meet you halfway. This is taken to a very literal conclusion in Greek necromancy in particular, because just as often as people conjure shades, like you would a ceremonial magician, another common method was to do the ritual, but then just go to sleep and have a dream in which you met the spirit. And that was often suggested in the case of spirits, who may be more peace, right? Spirits who didn't die a violent death or don't have any reason to still be sticking around. It was much easier to meet them in a dream than it was to conjure them to physical presence. And, like we've talked about before, conjuring a spirit to physical appearance is no easy task. It requires a ton of preparation. But I think this doesn't sit well with a lot of people, though, the idea of meeting a spirit in a dream, because we tend to think of our dreams as not real or, imaginary or all in our head, when that simply isn't true. Ancient cultures didn't look at dreams that way. This is like a modern invention. If you meet a spirit in a dream, I consider that just as valid as conjuring a spirit. And the Greeks would agree with me. If you met a god in a dream, well, you met that god. It didn't matter if it was in a dream.
Well, we've sort of disenchanted dreams in our culture, so. Let's see. Let's get into the blood thing, because the blood thing I found very interesting. One of the things you suggest is that not just that, like, so if there's a murder in a house, it's more likely to be haunted, and maybe it's the people who got murdered, et cetera, et cetera. But you suggest that maybe certain spirits are just drawn to like the blood and other emotions that are present when that murder happens. It's not necessarily the spirits that were killed there.
That's true. So if there's a lot of blood that's spilled, blood is especially human blood, that is an incredibly powerful force in the spirit world. Incredibly powerful. And magicians across the board will tell you to never use blood as an offering of any kind or as any sort of sacrifice, because it brings out a very primal nature in even the best spirits. I don't know why this is, but they act very chaotically and very aggressively. So I could see very easily that if someone is badly wounded in an area or dies, that not only is that spirit of the person potentially there, but the shedding of blood will actually attract other spirits in the vicinity. And because I argue that spirits have a very, very strong sense of smell, they could come from quite a long ways away and collect in that area, facilitating even stronger hauntings.
Okay.
See, this is the thing that, like, I felt like, because there's two camps on this. Like, for instance, if we go to Agrippa says, "From hence it is that the souls of the dead are not to be called up without blood, or by the application of some part of their relict body." It's like Agrippa's opinion, and this fits with narratives of necromancy, say like in the Odyssey or in ancient Greece, that blood was necessary if you wanted a physical manifestation, right? If you wanted the spirit to actually appear before you and you weren't doing dream incubation, blood was necessary for human spirits. Now, I definitely agree with Sean's point. Like, you should never be offering human blood to, like, say, goetic spirits, right? Don't do that. But goetic spirits are different than human dead. Human dead, I would say that I wouldn't completely prescribe against blood, because a lot of sources do say that it is necessary for the spirit to reconstitute itself. Now, I'm not saying to use human blood. Like, you can buy blood from, like, a butcher's shop, used to make blood sausage or whatever. Like, there are other ways to find blood. But there's also a lot of stories in Greek necromancy in which spirits are conjured to physical appearance where there isn't blood used. But there's usually some sort of other offering, right? Like either cakes made with honey and barley and, like, fruit in them that are burned in the fire, or eggs are really popular, like olive oil, wine. It almost makes me wonder if you knew something about the spirit that you were trying to conjure, if you shouldn't find, like, what they like to eat in their life. Like, if they were a really big fan of cheeseburgers, maybe you should buy them a cheeseburger and offer that to them. I mean, I don't know. This is why people need to experiment with this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that necromancers also have a much higher degree of protection on them that a ghost hunter would.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So if they're going to be using blood to agitate a spirit and then get them essentially energetic enough to do something, I mean, there are also necromantic rites of digging up someone's coffin, stealing their body part, evoking them and saying, yeah, I'll give you your arm back as long as you do this thing for me.
Right.
Yeah,
I don't think I would.
What are the Catholic? Yeah, I mean, that's literally exactly what the Catholic saints are. I mean, they are dead that have been bound using their body parts. Yeah, and Agrippa says that too, right? Like, you can also use a part of their body. Like, if you have a part of their body, that works just as well as blood. But yeah, the use of blood, I would say, only use it in necromancy, and only use it if you really know what the hell you're doing. Like, your first couple tries, maybe skip the blood.
That's fair.
And the question, though, is why blood? Like, why is blood so strong?
Well,
like,
it's a vital force, right?
Yeah, that would be my guess.
Because of life force. Yeah, I wish we had a better understanding of the things. But it is the force that keeps everything going. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, if you just look at it from a binary, right? Like, things that do not have blood are dead. Things that have blood are alive. So therefore,
True.
Blood equals life.
Yep. And who knows what kind of energy that blood carries as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so you talk about let's talk about this. I've never talked to anyone about this, but Gödel's incompleteness theory and how this affects both math and also the way we look at, like, paranormal stuff.
So this was a section of the book I actually edited out recently. And
okay.
Yeah, so this I edited that out. I actually sent the book over to Patrick Harper to have him take a look at it.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, he liked it, and I really appreciated the time he spent on it, because he absolutely did not have to. But he really enjoyed it, and he gave me some really useful feedback. And that particular part, I think, probably might be more interesting or relevant to me personally than my readers. So I decided just to scrap it, because I'm not sure if the readers would actually find it particularly useful. But in short, Gödel was an incredibly liminal, marginal character, even though he made great leaps in formal logic, the field of formal logic. He was a genius beyond compare, often compared to Aristotle in his brilliance. And his incompleteness theorem was an example of liminality. But I think his major contribution is in advocating Platonism in mathematics, basically saying that the math we use, they're not just a bunch of symbols that we move around at will because we created them. There's actually an intrinsic structure to the world that is preventing incorrect answers, that there is only a certain correct answer for our mathematical system. 2 + 2 = 4, for example. It can't equal anything else. Mm-hmm. And the question is, where did this limitation come from? And using logic, he's been able to argue that there is an intrinsic force in nature, which implies design. It implies that there is some sort of logical reasoning in the world. And he also demonstrated the limits of our understanding of science. So we essentially can only go to a certain point on understanding, and we probably are not going to get to a point where we can have a complete and consistent system of mathematics. This all sounds very complicated. It essentially advocates for a spiritual realm, if you really extrapolate it out. And that's what I was trying to prove, or at least point to, that if a person as brilliant as Gödel, and he even wrote in his 14 philosophical points that he believes in spirits, in a sense, if even he's convinced of that, then having a belief in this is not irrational, it's not incoherent at all. It's actually very reasonable.
Right. Okay. All right. So let's get down to some of what you suggest here. Like, if someone's going to do a ghost hunt, what do you feel are the things that are going to enhance this?
The location, as we mentioned before, is probably first and foremost. Again, somewhere secluded, somewhere ideally dark, in basements, in caves. There's a place called Bellwitch Cave that is notoriously haunted. Mm-hmm. Places by water, places that are quiet. Even by crossroads. Crossroads are very much used in magic. I'm not sure why they're important, but they seem to be a liminal space. And places rich in negative ions. I put a template in my book, and the template was used to take all the previous conclusions that I came to in the book and put it into one solid structure, and say, to my readers, you can use all of this structure, or you can use only a couple of the ideas. It's super flexible. It's meant to be there to inspire and to mold to their particular style. So one of the things that I'd recommend is providing the spirit with some sort of motivation for actually performing, and making sure that the spirit actually is strong enough to perform. So if you're looking for EVPs, if you're looking for them to move plastic bottles around the table, they have to be interested. There has to be some sort of payoff, and they have to be able to do that. In Martin Coleman's book on necromancy, he mentions that not all spirits are strong enough to produce all phenomena. There are rules, and they require nourishment. Now, we just talked about blood. A good replacement would be cut up fruit, or cut up fruit with honey on it, because it acts as a preservative. You can extend the life. You can use this as an offering. You just put it somewhere in the vicinity where the haunting is occurring, and they will gain nourishment for that, probably within 24 to 48 hours. You can even come back and see if they're stronger to do it. Now, that's a very short period of time, but you can still try it out. You can still experiment with it. But having the right motivation is important. So offering what I just mentioned as a reward for a particular performance. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned there is key too, like building a relationship with the spirit. Yeah. I think is something that is I don't think it's done enough, and there's no emphasis on that. But ritual magicians, when they're conjuring, say, like goetic spirits, you work with the same spirit many times, and you build a relationship that can last your entire life. It wouldn't be any different for human dead as well, especially if they're your ancestors. Like if you're working with your ancestors, then yeah, you need to build that relationship, and it's not going to start out very strong, but as time goes by, it will mature and develop, and the communication will become easier and easier.
It's an interesting mentality that we have in the West, because we kind of view it as those are spirits and we are humans, but those are human spirits. So why don't we just cut to the chase and say, we're all spirits at heart anyway. We're just, we're using a material vessel. And at heart, that's what we are. We're spirits interacting with each other because that's the way we're going to end up anyway. So it really becomes personal when you respect the spirits you're working with, because it gives you a sort of humility. And it's sort of like a Buddhist meditation on death, that there's an inevitability that's coming. And I think it sensitizes you to the process, and you're a lot more respectful to who you're talking to. You're not instigating it. You're not trying to agitate it, and certainly not threatening it. I think these are going to actually backfire. I think it's better to gain a sort of very respectful cooperation. And if you're in a particular location and you're not getting the result you want, just go somewhere else. There's no need to agitate them more, because very small, innocent-looking phenomena can become very serious very quickly if they become agitated, and it's hard to control.
And what has happened when you've tried some of these techniques?
I got an EVP that was absolutely top notch. It sounded like somebody was in the room with the recorder, and I kind of cheated a little bit. I broke my own rules, so I went to a cemetery, and I burned incense, because smell is very, very important to spirits. If you notice, whether it's whether it's in the church or at a Hindu temple, they always have incense burning. The church uses frankincense and cassia. Smell is very important. So I'll burn incense for them to make them more comfortable. And at that point, I simply said, I was in the cemetery, and I said, any and all spirits who want to come home with me, you are free to do so. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter mean or nice. I do not care. Just follow me home. Because I was trying to convince my girlfriend at the time that this existed. So I needed something big to happen. So I invited them all with me. I know how to protect myself. So if things get out of control, I could fix it. And they did. Our fire alarm at one point started going off. It does not have batteries in it. My girlfriend saw shadows on the wall. She was freaking out. And I told her, I was like, look, this is what you wanted, right? So, do you believe me yet? But the EVP we got, in the morning, we left the tape recorder running, and we had asked generally in the air, what's your name? How old are you? Things of this sort. So we only used like 2 or 3 questions, and we left the tape recorder running during the day in our living room. We went to work. When we came back, we greeted the dog, and we unpacked all our stuff, and we listened to the tape recorder. And in the morning, you can hear us asking these questions, what's your name? When we got back from work later that night, you could hear us coming through the door. Only then did it answer, and it said, my name's Mary Ann, as clear as a bell. And no one was in that room, as clear as a bell. Well, we were in the room, but we didn't say that. We don't have the voice of a female child. Right. So, so she said, my name's Mary Ann, clear as a bell. It was not a whisper. I didn't have to turn the volume up. And, because of this sort of trickster phenomena that happens at times that, discredits you, of course, I try to upload the audio file on my computer, and I accidentally delete it. So I have absolutely no evidence that this actually took place, but it did.
Well, that is how that goes.
It's very frustrating. And, I'm hoping the book kind of mitigates some of that by getting people to have more genuine experiences that are more powerful. That way it's undeniable. And at the end of the day, if more people have genuine experiences, I don't think that the evidence is really going to matter that much, because they know what happened. You know what I mean? We're not convincing anybody in the science realm. We can have top-notch evidence. They'll still deny it. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in getting people closer to spirits.
Yes. Absolutely. I fully agree with that. Because you're never going to convince the mainstream science at this point that this stuff exists. They don't even acknowledge that psychic stuff exists, despite evidence coming from labs that's overwhelming.
Yeah, and in terms of magic and the paranormal, it's always been ostracized in cultures. In ancient times, it was only the elite class that was able to do it, and then it changed into, well, we can't do it because it's dangerous, and we don't want the people to be empowered. We want to have power over them, so we're going to outlaw it. And then it became, well, it's an insult unto God, so you can't do it. And then it became, when we got more scientific, we said, well, you're just superstitious and stupid, so we're not going to listen to you, but you can't do it anyway.
Right.
And then now it's, oh, if you believe in that stuff, you must be mentally ill, so we'll put you in a psych ward. It's always going to be ostracized in our culture. It's always going to be that way.
And it's always going to be sort of in that liminal state as well.
Yeah, and so be it. So while everyone else may be arguing over it, people who know what they're doing are having real experiences, and I think that's going to enhance our life because it gives us a more fuller appreciation of reality.
Now, you of course bring up the trickster in all of this, and what do you think the role of the trickster is? Another easy question.
I think the trickster has connections with the concept of ignorance and forgetfulness. And I think ignorance and forgetfulness is the nature of the material world. By nature, I think the human mind has a very poor memory. We tend to only live for the present moment day. Learning from our mistakes we find difficult. So we seem to constantly be in this state of forgetfulness and ignorance just by our nature. If you look at how we perceive the world, as Robert Anton Wilson said, the universe is non-simultaneously apprehended, meaning we can't perceive the entire universe at once. We can only perceive a very, very, very tiny fraction of it, and that doesn't give us any knowledge at all. So we're constantly in this ignorant state, and I think the trickster facilitates that when it comes to periods of enlightenment or of epiphany, where we are reminded of our true nature, of, oh yeah, we're spiritual. How could we have forgotten that? And the trickster comes in and says, hey, forget all that. That's not important. I mean, how many people have had a very powerful, undeniable paranormal experience, and I'm telling you, right after it happens, they say, you know what? I don't even know if that just happened. It doesn't even feel real.
Right.
Right?
Right, yeah.
Exactly. You're already trying to forget the experience. So I think that's the role, is to try to keep us asleep. I know that sounds kind of like Gnostic and like Archon-ish, but I think that's kind of what it is. We have to battle that.
Wren, any thoughts?
No, I totally agree on all those points. I mean, I think that, and a lot of this, again, is due to this, what Gordon White likes to call this, Descartesian head trauma, right? This idea that because of the philosophy of materialism, that there are things that are real and there are things that are not real, we tend to look at reality in a binary, right? Like with our dreams are all in our head. Like we break up the world into this within and without, when in reality it's a continuum.
Yeah.
Even referring to the spirit world as the spirit world is it's like shadows of this binary thinking, right? Because really it's all one world. I don't know. I mean, I do think that I do think that studying these things is really important to people, because nothing will ever prove to someone that it exists, unlike personal experience. Right? Like, personal experience is what people have to have. You're really, and the funny thing is like magic, like all this stuff we're talking about, it doesn't matter if you believe it or not. Like if you do it and you actually do it the way the books tell you to do it, it will work, and you'll have these experiences. Like I promise you. Grant Morrison famously said like he had his first real experience with magic because he was reading, grimoires and Aleister Crowley, and said that if you do these things, then certain results will follow. And he just did them, and then a demon showed up. Like, it doesn't matter if you believe a demon's going to show up; they will show up because they're real. You just live in a world where the last 100 years of society has convinced you that it's not.
Right. Yeah, that's very true.
But it's not that true it's not true in the rest of the world too. It's mainly a problem, like I think Sean mentioned earlier. It's like a problem with Western thinking, right? Like the reality of spirits, say like in East Asia, is just like a daily fact of life. It's not seen as anything strange or out of the ordinary.
You go ahead.
And I was going to say that it's interesting because the world itself doesn't change. I mean, some of these spirits have been around for thousands and thousands of years, maybe eternity. I'm not sure. And the way we perceive them changes, but their actual behavior doesn't. For example, the ancient Egyptians used to have these legends and myths and narratives of religious phenomena happening, or this religious drama of gods interacting with each other, and they would create a drama and dress up these characters and play it out, and they would consider these rituals. Now, what's cool is that when they did this, if they did it properly, sometimes these gods or these angels would actually appear and participate in the drama. You'd see lights flickering around, little orbs, I guess, and they would be participating in the drama that the people were doing in honor of them. Now, the connection there with our current day is how we create movies. And if you look at how we create movies, almost always when there is a movie about an exorcism or even a religious movie, people on the set will record paranormal events actually happening. And it's the same thing. We're doing the same thing we did thousands of years ago. We're creating this drama, and it's in honor of a particular occasion, and those spirits are then participating in it. So the world doesn't change. We just seem to forget.
Okay.
I like that because, I've mentioned to people before how, like, all of the parallels the ritual magic has with theater and dance, and how every person who's a ritual magician could really benefit from taking some dance classes. Because it's when you do a ritual, because I was talking earlier like about like trance states and stuff, but even more so than that, like the setting, like having the properly consecrated tools, the candles, the incense, the sound, like if you're using musical instruments, everything about it creates an altered environment, around you. Like it becomes an environment where magical things can happen, right? It's the reason most people don't see spirits while they're at work. You have to create this space in order for these contacts to occur. And that's why the tools and the rituals and the vestments and everything are all important. And I think people do this stuff and they don't follow the instructions and they don't get all of these things. They don't put in the effort. And then they complain that it doesn't work. When in reality, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of preparation. You have to set the stage because without that, it's just empty. You're never going to make that contact.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult. And as I mentioned before, I mean, the first time I did this, and I didn't even do it properly at all, it took 2.5 hours for something to happen. I mean, I've heard of magicians staying in the circles, evoking and calling the spirit for 4 or 5, 6 hours. I mean, just an insane commitment. But I mean, it's also very dangerous. It's very rewarding, but it's very dangerous. So if you want the spirit to be there and they actually show up, you can't go running out of the circle if you're scared. You're stuck. You're there until the end. That's too bad. It's dangerous. So people have to realize that it's not too much different when you're dealing with ghosts too. These are spiritual creatures, and just because they say they're Uncle Tom doesn't mean that they are. They could be impersonating something else.
Right. And that's always a good question. Like, how do you know the things that you're dealing with are what they say they are?
Not by doing Ouija. That's one step. You will get zero information by using a Ouija board. You have no idea what's going on, and that's what causes all the problems. The Ouija board itself is not doing anything. It's a piece of wood. It's
Right.
when you try to use it and say, "Hey, come one, come all," like I did in the cemetery. That's when you get problems.
Yeah.
But typically, daemons behave in a much more calculating way, and it's kind of weird to say that because sometimes they don't. It's in short, it's kind of hard to tell sometimes. I'll say that the intensity of the haunting seems to matter. If it's very, very intense, then I don't know if a human spirit would have the energy to do that. Also, daemons really don't like sharpened iron or iron of any sort. That drives them crazy. So if they respond very strongly to that, maybe that's an indication. But maybe human ghosts do too. So it's not, for me, it's not immediately clear. I can't give any hard and fast rules, although there are a lot of speculations that I have in the book to discern the two.
And iron's one of those things that's always interested me. Like, why is iron such a deterrent to this stuff?
I kind of feel like, and this is kind of like a Platonist idealist view, maybe, but I kind of think that the material world is a metaphor or a poem based on the spiritual world. The spiritual world comes first. So we have iron, and the qualities that we perceive in iron are somehow resonant with the attributes of particular gods. I mean, iron has affinities with Mars, and Mars has affinities with war and aggression and intensity and passion and bravery. And I think that this world is sort of like a metaphor for that. It's sort of like trying to express that with how our senses perceive iron. I'm not sure. It's something like that.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I mean, this is my Neoplatonist head talking, but things like Mars and its associated with iron, like the way those correspondences work, I don't think people really understand that. Like Mars is iron, and iron is Mars. They're correspondents because they're sort of the same thing in a Platonic sense. So it's the same thing when you put on a paper crown and tell a spirit that you're King Solomon. The spirit, it's not that they can't tell that that's not true. It's just that by creating that analogy or creating that metaphor, it is true. You are Solomon if you say you are Solomon. The same deal with the iron in the sword. That sword is Mars. And Mars is the terrible. Mars is like you mentioned, war and bloodshed and violence. It's the same reason why, like the black-handled knife used in Galatia is associated with Saturn, because Saturn's all about binding and control. These correspondences play like a really huge role in doing magic in general. I think they get kind of a bad rap because, I don't know, like people aren't into like the Golden Dawn anymore, which, fair, but like the system of correspondences and stuff, especially the stuff in Agrippa, I think is just as valid as it always has been, and it's useful to know. I did want to mention one thing too about identifying the spirits before we move past that. One really useful thing for determining if a spirit really is the spirit that you're trying to call, and this more applies to non-human dead, right? But I encourage readers or listeners to pick up a copy of the fourth book of Occult Philosophy, because Agrippa goes into this. He gives shapes that are familiar to spirits of the different spheres, of the different planets. So like the familiar forms of the spirits of Mercury. He says, the spirits of Mercury will appear for the most part in a body of middle stature, cold, liquid, and moist, fair and with an affable speech, in a humane shape and form, like unto a knight armed, of color clear and bright. The motion of them is as if they were silver-colored clouds. For their sign, they cause and bring horror and fear upon him that calls them. And then he gives like a bunch of descriptions of what a mercurial spirit might look like a king riding upon a bear, a fair youth, a woman holding a distaff, a dog, a she-bear, a magpie. And so if you conjure a spirit and they appear in one of these forms that is like appropriate for whatever planetary rulership they may be under, and it matches the description that Agrippa gives, it's pretty safe to say that like that's the first, you got the first part down. Now it still doesn't mean they are who they say they are, but that's why every grimoire goes into different ways to test spirits. If you read John King's Imperial Arts, he goes into like the way he tests the different spirits and stuff. A lot of it is basically compelling them using the sword, compelling them using bindings to tell the truth. In addition, you can also, like, if a spirit's station is to do a certain thing, then you could ask them to like do that thing, right? And if they can't do it, or they say they don't know how to do that, then they're probably not the right spirit. Or you got somebody else by mistake. In an excellent book of magic, which was recently published, the Alcon, he talks a lot about, or rather, it's a translation of an earlier book by Sir Gilbert Humphrey. I think I'm getting that name right. I'm probably missing that. Okay. He mentions like a way of testing spirits by like hiding something before you conjure them, like taking a ring out into the woods and putting it in a specific place, right? And then when you conjure the spirit, you say, well, if you're so great and mighty, where did I leave this ring? And if they can't answer you, then they're not really who they say they are.
Yeah. But Humphrey he took it to a whole new sadistic level that they would say where it was, and he would say, "No, you're wrong anyway."
he would gaslight them. So, he was kind of an asshole.
But quickly back on the iron thing. The iron is very useful because I feel like this can be used in connection with like alien abductions. And a lot of authors have speculated that the aliens responsible for alien abductions are actually spiritual.
Right.
Now, I would be very interested to see if an abductee had a very sharpened iron sword under their bed. I wonder if the abductions would stop. If they did, then we would get confirmation that it is a spiritual phenomena.
Well, you also got the whole connection with fairy faith and how they'd hang iron over the baby's cribs to prevent changelings and things like that. So that makes sense.
Yeah, but of course, we're more sophisticated now. We're not going to believe in any of that, and then we're going to suffer all these abductions.
I do think looking back, like abductions are something that I've been talking to people about recently too. Like in particular, I've got this idea in my head that whatever these like greys are that are abducting people, there's always that constant association with owls, and that same association exists in like European legends of the Strigoi or the Strix, like these owl demons who lurk in the woods at night and beset travelers while they sleep and drink their blood. And even if you go back to like Sumerian and like Semitic sources, you have the Lilin, which are these sort of spirits of the night that drink your blood and abduct you, who the name also means screech owl. And a lot of times they're depicted as owls. Like there's a really famous carving of, I think it's Lamia, and she's flanked by these like two owls. And so like I see whatever those, quote unquote aliens are, I think they're the same thing as those things. And we've known about them for a long time. I could be completely wrong. It's just like, this is the kick I'm on lately. And so I think what could be just as effective, I think the iron would be effective. Like Sean mentioned, I think even more effective would be like an amulet to repel Lamia, which was a common thing that you would put around the necks of newborn infants in like Babylon, right, or Samaria, because it was seen as a way to keep her from stealing them, or like you mentioned, Seriah, that goes back to like fairy stuff as well. I think these traditions have survived from antiquity, just changing form based on the culture they're in.
All right, well, we are just about out of time. So, Sean, what is the full name of your book?
The full name of the book is Ancient Magic and Modern Ghost Hunting, and it's on Lulu.
Okay. So there's physical and digital available?
There's just physical, as that is all Lulu allows me to do, I guess.
Oh, okay.
So that's where it is. It's in paperback form.
Okay. All right. And are you planning on doing anything else after this, book-wise?
Yeah, so I would like to create something along the lines of a journal where I take these techniques that I put into the book and I apply them in the field and I record the results and then I publish that to see how it went down, basically.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I'll probably start working on that in about 6 months, probably.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely recommend the book. It was an interesting read. It's a very interesting idea. And I definitely think you're on the right track here. And I love anyone who can look at this stuff in a different way. I mean, that's part of my goal with this show is to bring about different ways of looking at this phenomenon and kind of throwing out some of the assumptions and taking different perspectives on it. So this was a perfect fit for what I like to do on this show.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
And do you have a Facebook page too for the book?
Yes. So your reader or your listeners can just go to Facebook and type in Ancient Magic and Modern Ghost Hunting, and the page should come right up. It's administered by my girlfriend. I don't have a Facebook directly, but the page is there.
All right. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thanks.
Join us September 25th, 26th, and 27th for a 3-day special streaming event, Strange Realities, to push the limits of your reality. Featuring authors, academics, researchers, occultists, experiencers, podcasters, and practitioners. All presenting fresh cutting-edge material and research. Streaming live. Featuring presentations by
Brent Rains, editor of Alternate Perceptions magazine. Aaron Goulias, host of the Saucer Life podcast. David Metcalf, writer and researcher. Alan Greenfield, author of Secret Cipher of the Euphonons. Stephanie Quick, writer and blogger. Red Pill Junkie, Fortean researcher and explorer. Tim Banal, host of Banal of America. Guy Malone, iconoclast and troublemaker. Timothy Ritter, host of Strange Familiars. Kiki Dombrowski, author and practitioner. Greg Bishop, author of Project Beta. Ginny Ashford, host of 13 O'Clock. Recluse, host of The Farm. Jack Montgomery, Folk Magic. Joshua Cutchin, author of Thieves in the Night. Reverend Michael Carter, Alien Contact Experiencer. Dr. Future, host of Future Quake. Tony Kale, author of Memphis Hoodoo. Rin Collier, occultist. Seriah Askath, host of Where Did the Road Go? John Tenney, Ghost Stalkers and Hell.
all 3 days, only $20. Tickets and info available at strangerealitiesconference.com. Brought to you by the Conspiranormal Podcast. Conspiranormal.com. Strange Realities.
I want to thank and give a shout out to all my Patreons who help support this show and keep it going. It really does help keep it going. And I want to particularly thank Tim, Super Inframan, Allison Cook, Patricia W., Barbara Fisher, Will Powell, Big Boy Limina, Craig Parmenter, Walker, Joanna Rojas, Maddie, David Moore, Vincent Trewell, The Great Change, Stone Wilderness, Luke Osborne, Becky Trainer, Chris Barr, Rob Drummond, Alex Whitcomb, Edu Camahort, Tactical Therapist, Janet Bunderson, 36 Dingo, Sam Sheeran, Jennifer Campbell, American Rambler, Kevin, John Rutledge Foster, Eric Citron, Andy McNamara, Sasha Jorg, Matthias Sunby, Dominic O'Malley, Christopher Vaughn, Riker and Stark, J. Otto Bullitt, Jose A., Roger Gonzalez, Craig Cicernos, Ray Benedetto, Linz Jackson K., Alfred Tuttle, Matthew Sproul, Kevin Schreck, Patricia Giaquinta, William Lovelace, Mark Brady, Chris 646, Carla Mahoney, and James Lattimore. Thank you all so very much. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.